Do you know what happens to people when they're starved? Not hungry, deliberately and forcibly starved, which means cutting off all access to food and eliminating their ability to grow food. Do you know what happens to their future descendants if they survive that starvation? In the 1840s, Ireland suffered a devastating forcible starvation campaign conducted by the British that you were taught to call the Irish Potato Famine. A purposefully crafted and maintained title of this war crime to absolve Britain from taking ownership of this time in history. It makes it sound like the Irish just failed to grow crops, like it was a natural disaster that removed their ability to cultivate land that they had been connected to for thousands of years. What actually happened was that the British Empire stripped the native Irish of their ancestral lands and reduced them to something called tenant farmers, renting small plots of land back to the Irish under control of absentee landlords of the empire. The most fertile land in Ireland at that time was used primarily to grow cash crops and raise livestock, strictly to export to Britain, not to feed local communities. The British then forced the remaining Irish population onto less fertile land in plots that were so small that literally only potatoes could grow. And this was the only food that the Irish were allowed to keep for themselves until the British had overworked the land so much that the potatoes became diseased. So while the only crop that the Irish could grow to feed their families began to die off, the British exported grain, oats, meats outside of Ireland to the British, leaving the Irish people, millions of them, to starve. In addition to the exporting of food out of Ireland, British soldiers also guarded food shipments and blocked aid, which sounds very familiar. Aid was denied to the Irish people unless they converted to Protestantism. Over 1 million Irish people died, and 2 million additional Irish people were displaced. In 1943, during the British rule in India, the British did it again in what is called the Bengal famine. Winston Churchill diverted rice and grain from India to British troops and European stockpiles, and then he, again, seems like a colonial tactic, blocked relief shipments and crops were forcibly seized. And then one day, the British burned those same rice fields and destroyed those same stockpiles, cutting off entire Bengali villages from food and trade and burned the earth, so it prohibited them from growing more food. 3 million people died. Entire villages were erased. Today we understand things like the effects of generational trauma thanks to things like epigenetic research, which shows that famine survivors pass on higher rates of heart disease, diabetes,